Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Quill and Hammer Reforging Fiction. I'm Trevor. This is Zach. And Zach, what's going on today?
Well, today, Trev, we are wrapping up our 8-week series reviewing and reforging the Harry Potter film franchise. So today is Deathly Hallows Part 2. This is the finale. This is what all the previous films have been leading up to. And my question for you today, Trev, is does it pay off? Was the buildup worth it?
In short, the answer is of course it does. All right? This was such an iconic film. It was such an iconic franchise that when you went back, if you put yourself back in your shoes in 2011, 13 years ago or 14 years ago when this came out, ask yourself this question. Were you disappointed or did you walk out thinking, "Oh my gosh, this was awesome?" I
I mean, I
mean,
can't say I didn't walk out feeling that way.
right? Like you were not disappointed. I know this because you and I probably went together, Zach.
I'm sure we did.
But you weren't disappointed. I wasn't disappointed. It was really awesome to go and see and we had a fantastic time watching it. I don't know if I had a single complaint back then. So yes, the payoff was worth it. Objectively, it was a fantastic film, a fantastic series, and even though there are things, in this entire last 8 weeks have been about us wanting to fix things. That doesn't take away from the fact that they did a really good job with the entire series overall. You know, there are some things that obviously we would have changed if we were the directors, but I'm not mad. What are your thoughts?
Well, I have to keep telling myself this that when a film is adapted, excuse me, when a book is adapted to film, the goal isn't to one reproduce every word that was written on the page
Right.
because film flows differently than a novel. And in terms of adapting and representing the source material, in light of all my previous complaints, for the most part, they did just that. They represented from start to finish everything that Harry Potter had to offer. And in that vein, I think they did a fine job. But there are still give and takes that I would have made different choices with. What about you?
Well, I agree. I agree with you there. If the core of the series was captured, no doubt. But there are things that I thought should have been changed as well. But let's start with you. You brought it up. What would you have changed? And maybe, before we even get there, what was something you felt like they did really well in this scene or in this scene in this movie? Where we've kind of started that way, all the way back. Was there something that stuck out that was like this was it. This was really good.
You know, I mean, there are things that everybody's gonna say. I think Alan Rickman's performance elevated everything else in the film, and I think that's true throughout the whole franchise. Um, Another thing that and it's this is where the director's choices come into play is, in the books, everything is from Harry's perspective. You never leave Harry's perspective. But in the films, we switch to Voldemort occasionally. And I actually really did enjoy, even though it wasn't in the books, I enjoyed seeing Voldemort's frustration with the Elder Wand, with Harry finding the Horcruxes and seeing him lash out and, one scene in particular, let's see. I think it's when they're trying to break the force field and the wand resists him, or maybe it's after a Horcrux is destroyed. I can't remember exactly when in the film it takes place, but Voldemort seems shaken, and one of the Death Eaters comes up and says, "My lord, are you okay?" And just because he's pissed off, he kills him. Like, no regard for anybody in his ranks. It's just him, and I like that. And I think it shows how unstable he actually is, both in terms of his powers aren't working the way he wants. He's always searching for more. He can't be satisfied with what he has. And his psychological instability in that he casually commits homicide even amongst his loyal followers. You know what
Right,
I mean?
right,
And it's like, it kind of goes along with the whole theme of the series that Voldemort can't understand love, and so if somebody's showing concern for him, it's like, no, get off me. I don't want that. I don't want
right,
that. Get off me. You're showing weakness by caring for my well-being type thing.
right.
So that's something that I actually really enjoyed about the film.
You know what? I had never thought of it that way, but it's something that you can't help but enjoy because of that reason. The great thing about film, but also the downside, when you're talking about books and adaptations and all of these things, is that you don't get, the perspectives that, you know, you may want or not. Like you said, the books are all from Harry's perspective with very few exceptions. There are one or two chapters here and there, I guess. Oh, excuse me. But you can't do that in a book. You can't just be Harry, not knowing really what's going on, and you have to expand it a little bit, and it captures the flavor really well, I think.
And maybe our viewers aren't aware of this yet, but I am a medical student right now, and one of the things we talk about is personality disorders, right?
Hmm.
And as I think about the characteristics portrayed by Voldemort, I can see several personality disorders that he may or may not have depicted by his actions, his attitudes, and for me, that makes him a little more human. You know what I mean?
Right,
In as much as you can humanize a evil for evil's sake type of villain.
right. Well, expound on that. What are we talking about? Just out of curiosity.
Well, there are three classes of personality disorders, type A, B, and C. Um, and the two that I immediately come to mind when talking about Voldemort is schizoid personality disorder, which is a personality disorder where the person doesn't have any desire to be attached to society. They are kind of aloof and they don't really care. It's think of a an introvert, but kind of to the extreme, to the point that you are actively avoiding any contact with anybody, and in medicine we talk about your affect. It's kind of the way your attitude and your expression is presented to other people, right? And it's just flat. It's just, yeah, I saw a car accident today and several people were killed. And then I went and I got my coffee and went back home and that's it. You know what
Right.
I mean? And so I think in terms of his inability to feel love or to care about feeling love is certainly a schizoid personality disorder. And then obviously the other one that comes to mind is narcissistic personality disorder, where he only cares about himself, only or thinks that he is deserves to be the ruler of the world, right? Obviously, those are narcissistic type behaviors. And then the last one, and the one that I think you see very first is something called antisocial personality disorder. This is characterized by someone who has no respect for the rights or property of others. And the first and it typically presents in childhood, which is interesting because when we learn about who Voldemort is in episode 6, book 6 in The Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore goes to visit Tom Riddle in the orphanage, he finds out that he steals things from other children. He tortures them for fun. And that's something that someone with an antisocial personality disorder would do. It's
Right.
called something different when it's in childhood, but it leads to antisocial personality disorder when you're an adult. And so while it doesn't excuse his actions, it puts some perspective into, maybe he's not just evil for evil's sake. Maybe he's got some actual medical problems that real people deal with that he's going through, and that can lend some perspective onto why he does what he does, right?
Right.
And like I said, doesn't excuse it. He's still a horrible person, and there's no excuse for it, but just a little bit of shedding some light into what may be going on inside of his head.
That's that's interesting. I mean, I know the in-world lore, the canon idea is that, and I don't know if maybe this is just something that was floating around the internet and it's not true, or maybe this is something that J.K. Rowling wrote. Um, but the idea is that a child that was conceived under the influence of a love potion
Mhm.
is incapable of feeling love.
Interesting. I'd never
And
heard that.
and so it's like he never had a chance regardless, and
Right.
think of how hard his life was. This is, 19 what, 40s?
Hmm.
When he's, 1940s, he's in an orphanage. He's lived there his entire life, you know, abandoned from birth. From his perspective, I mean, his mom died, but like abandoned from birth, his he had family, but like they didn't care about him. He knew his name, but like,
Hmm.
clearly they didn't want anything to do with him. Like you can see where all of that, and let's be honest, the 1940s, like today, and I am not saying that, the adoption and orphans and, any of that is perfect now, because that is just a hard situation regardless. But back then it was likely a lot worse. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And so I think as a kid watching these films, I kind of just viewed it as, well, he's evil for evil's sake. Like the
Right,
Joker in The Dark Knight, some
right,
men just want to see the world burn, right?
right,
And that's sort of how I always viewed Voldemort. But as I think about it, as I think about some of these different perspectives, I realize, maybe that's not quite accurate. He's still a horrible person, no
right,
excuse, but there's more of a reason. It's more logical. And I think for that reason, I can appreciate Voldemort more as a villain.
right. I think you're right. I will not say he is the best villain out there, but he is a humanized person when you think about it,
Hmm.
Mom died at birth, orphaned. He kind of, felt alone. He knew he was different. He could, do magical things. He couldn't feel, if you take the that, can't feel love because it's conceived under a love potion kind of idea, like he can't feel love. He doesn't understand that. He's, shunned by the others. He's different. He bullies them, kind of does this whatever, but he knows that there's something different about him, and then he goes, learns that he's a wizard. He gets really excited. he does amazing things. He turns out to be really well, and then he figures out that he's the heir of this, you know, really famous wizard, and kind of, that feeds into it. And with, I don't know, it's really interesting when you look at that. But then, um, going back to the movie, a lot of the brilliance of Voldemort is brought out by his actor, Ralph
Oh, for
Fiennes.
sure.
He does a fantastic job. I believe that was his name, right?
I think so.
He does a fantastic job. And um, anyway, that's we could probably talk about this forever and rely on your medical diagnosis and all of that. But let's move on. What what would you change? What we already established that we loved the series. That's why we're here.
For sure. For sure.
So you said there were a few things, that you would have changed directionally, rather than, you have the give and take, of course, of you can only put so much in a movie. You can't adapt word for word, but like, what would you have put in or taken out that we did in this instance?
Well, in a lot of these past episodes, I've been kind of nitpicky, and I'm going to try to not be nitpicky. For example, when they're getting the cup of Helga Hufflepuff from Bellatrix's Gringotts vault, the charm on everything in there, it's not just supposed to multiply, it's supposed to burn your skin,
Right.
right? And so there's added cost to getting the Horcrux. I'm not going to be nitpicky about those kinds of things. But what I do think was a missed opportunity was the explanation of Dumbledore's past from Aberforth, and immediately after, Harry choosing to be Albus's man, regardless, to say, you know what? Maybe I don't know everything that happened with him, but I trust, and I guess he does say that he trusted the man that he knew, but you don't get the explanation of, well, Dumbledore came and was supposed to be taking care of our sister, but he got too enthralled with his work and with Grindelwald and searching for the Horcruxes, and I had to put my foot down, and that's what started the battle. And he I think Aberforth says something like, and once our sister was dead, his problems were gone, right? Or something like that. And then Harry can say, no, you're wrong. He carried that with him his entire life. He relived that moment and was in agony getting getting one of these Horcruxes, right? And I think that was a missed opportunity. It was, and maybe not a totally missed opportunity. They still got the gist of it, but it was watered down to the point that I think it did that scene a disservice. So if I could, I would go back and put a little more, flesh that scene out a little bit more to reflect more of what the book did and to explain more of Dumbledore's mysterious past.
You know, I agree with you to an extent. I don't know if there's a lot that you can do. And right, it's give and take again, but most of the things that you and I talk about are character related.
Sure.
The core of the character, well, this was a big theme in book 7. Dumbledore died. You have, at the very beginning of the book, you have two articles come out. One by Rita Skeeter, one by um is it Alpheus
Alpheus
Doge?
Doge.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one is like Dumbledore was a good man, and then one is like, clearly it's like Dumbledore had some dark secrets and he was a horrible man, and. And so you have these. two conflicting ideas, and it casts real doubt, and then there's Harry. Put yourself in Harry's shoes. He just lost, he's lost everything that he thought was important to him, that not he thought that was important to him. His parents dead, his godfather dead. The only father figure that he ever actually really kind of had, maybe we'll call him a grandfather figure, but like his mentor, Dumbledore, gone. And then not only is Dumbledore gone, but like it feels like he left Harry just nothing almost. It's like, yeah,
Right.
he knows what he's looking for. That's about it. It's like, okay, well, we have no idea where where the cup is gonna be. We have no idea what the other Horcrux is. We have no idea where the locket is. Like, you almost feel abandoned.
Hmm.
And when you put yourself in his shoes there, it's like, okay, yeah, he feels abandoned by Dumbledore, and then he starts questioning. He sees this, the extract, I guess, of Rita Skeeter's book, and thinks, did I even know him at all? Was he a good guy? Does he have secrets? Like, he was friends with Grindelwald, WTF, and so
Right.
he's got this conflict the entire time, and he still has to learn, do I trust Dumbledore? Am I Dumbledore's man through and through, like I have been? Do I, and then you have this resolution right before he goes and faces, the final battle where it's like, yes, it doesn't matter. I trusted Dumbledore. I know all of the, I can, you know, it's like Aberforth's conversation was the final piece to say like, oh yeah. So yeah, he was a 17-year-old brilliant genius who felt stifled and had to come home and tried to do, what he needed to do, and he finally met someone who was brilliant like him, and you put yourself in Dumbledore's shoes a little bit, and then the final thing is this realization that here he is, back in book 6 in the cave, he's drinking that potion and reliving the worst moments of his life, and you can see that, and Harry realizes this, that's what he's talking about. And you can almost probably imagine him going all the way back to the Mirror of Erised in book 1, where he says, you know, Dumbledore, what do you see? And he says, I see myself getting socks for Christmas, and it's like, that's not what he saw. He
Right.
saw his family just like Harry did. And of course, you can't tell that to an 11-year-old. And some things are too painful to even talk about. But like, then it clicks. Then you can see Harry's realization that, like, that was the worst day of his life, and he has been trying to make up for it ever since. And he knew that he couldn't have power and that he should, all of these things. And that's when Harry realizes that Dumbledore was the man that he thought he was. And of course, and he kind of has this image of like, yeah, of course I didn't know who Dumbledore was. I'm a 17-year-old. Dumbledore is the headmaster of the school, and yeah, he's a brilliant wizard, and yeah, he clearly took a special interest in me because of the circumstances and all of these things, but like, of course I didn't know him. It's like, you don't know your parents, you don't know your teachers, you don't really know any of these people, but you can tell what kind of person they are, and that's when his doubts are laid to rest.
So you think that the conversation that did take place in the film was sufficient? Is that what you're telling me?
I started off thinking that, but no, no. I
You
I was like,
talked
you know what?
yourself
I
off the
think you're
ledge.
wrong, Zach. And then I started and I talked myself into thinking, no, you're right, Zach. It needed more payoff from Harry to come to that realization. Because through the you know, entire, call it 3 hours of the Deathly Hallows, and then however long until this conversation, you have this doubt, this kind of, you know, who was Dumbledore? Did I really know him? Ugh. And then it comes to the, emotional realization that it doesn't matter. He was a good man. I am Dumbledore's man through and through. And that carries you from that point all the way through the rest of the movie and the rest of the book and all of the things that happened. It's like giving him the resolve and the strength, and you don't really get that.
I think I think you get it a little bit. I think there is a shift in the tone of the film from that scene. It's less worry and franticness and more confidence. They walk through the secret tunnel into the room of requirement, and it's like it's triumphant, right? And you're what's up?
Secret tunnel.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I couldn't help it. Secret tunnel through the portrait. Secret, 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 secret tunnel. All right.
Yeah.
Little Avatar reference there. Last Airbender. Carry on, Zach.
Anyway, so you get to the room of requirement and you've got triumph, right?
Yeah.
And from there it's more confidence. It's we know what we have to do, we know where these things are. We just have to find them. We know where they are, we just have to find them. That was the dumbest thing I've ever said, but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
We it's there's more purpose. It's less we don't know what we're doing and more we have a plan and we're doing it. But moving on, one other thing that I want your opinion on is just the final battle in general. Let's say, from the destruction of Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem to the end of the film. Or maybe we can back it up and we can talk about uh, Snape's escape and the teachers of Hogwarts fighting Snape and flushing him out. Let's go from there onward. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so gosh, it's so hard because as we have said, there are certain things that needed to be included, and there's so much packed into this, final battle in the books that you need to include. You need um you need to kill Nagini, you need to find a way to destroy the cup, you need to find the diadem, all of this stuff, right? Um there's so much. You need Harry to die, have the, you know, you're at King's Cross in his mind with Dumbledore. You have that final little moment. Then he comes back, he sacrifices. There's so many things, right?
Right.
But there are things that I miss. I miss Harry defending, um, you know, Professor McGonagall in wherever. I
In the
miss,
Ravenclaw common room.
uh-huh. I miss, you know, maybe Ron saying to Hermione, "We need to get the house elves." Certain little nitpicky things that tie up some of the character arcs that we've just little things here and there that you've seen. Um, I don't know, but let's take a step back. As a whole, I think it was really good. But if we're starting like when you get to Hogwarts, like I don't know. I'm having a hard time really getting my head around the timeline. I wish there were certain things that had happened. I like the idea of well, let me back up. I'm not making any sense. Uh there are things that I liked. To be honest, I preferred the way that McGonagall got rid of Snape and the Carrows. Carrows?
I don't think we ever saw the Carrows.
We did. They were in the Great Hall when McGonagall and the Order and everyone, and they come in and they flush Snape out.
Hmm.
In the book, um, Harry goes to Ravenclaw Tower. They there was like a sensory charm or whatever, and then you've got the Lady Carrow sister trying to get into the tower, and McGonagall comes and lets her in, and so you've got all of that, and then Harry shows up, they leave, he's under the invisibility cloak, but like Snape comes and is like, Minerva, have you seen Harry Potter or something? And then they duel, right? And it's just her and I can't remember if like Flitwick or whoever are there, but she duels Snape, and it's one of the iconic duels because in the book because she's a transfiguration master and he's, got the dark arts kind of thing, but he's clearly not trying to hurt her, but she's trying to kill him, and it's really awesome. And then he flies out the window, and at that point they've only ever seen Voldemort fly without a wand or without a broom, and it's like, wow, Snape can do that too. He really is kind of cool, in an evil way. But anyway, so you have that. But in the book or in the movie, I think it's interesting because they're in the Great Hall and there's the windows behind them, and McGonagall is really trying to kill Snape, but you kind of see the kind of wizard that Snape is because rather than rather than attack her or attack anyone else, he deflects her killing charms or whatever into his, flunkies, into the Carrows. Do you
Oh,
remember
he
that?
does. I never noticed that.
Yeah. So like,
I never
so
noticed that.
he's protecting himself and he deflects the spells into the other two Death Eaters, and he's still trying to play the double agent because that's his role, but like,
Hmm.
like I thought that was a pretty interesting payoff and a change that was worth making because you can't put everything in, but it's just a little bit of foreshadowing, and
Right.
I thought that was really cool. There are some other things that I really liked. I liked um I liked that you had a little bit of Ron and Hermione in the Chamber of Secrets.
Hmm.
Uh, Once again, it's that perspective because in the book they run off and you're, just watching Harry's perspective, or you're from Harry's perspective because that's the book. But I like that you got to go see them, try and go down, get the fangs. It's very interesting to me. And then you have them in the room of requirement, and the fiend fire and getting rid of the diadem, and like I thought all of that was really cool and well done, and I appreciated it. So up to that point, I don't think I have any complaints with the battle.
Okay.
I think there were a lot of really cool things that happened, and I liked it. Now I could be nitpicky and say I hated the shield dome thing. I didn't think that was, looking back, I don't know if I appreciate that as much as, it's like the entire thing that was keeping the Death Eaters out was Voldemort's word because he said, I'll give you until midnight or whatever. Um, but that really doesn't matter. It's a nitpicky thing. Um, but before I move on, what are your thoughts on maybe the battle up to where I've laid out or moving forward, like I feel like I'm dominating this conversation a little bit.
No, I don't have a problem with any of that either, honestly. Um, I mean, there are some subtle differences, but none that I think are consequential enough to make me want to change. For example, the diadem is destroyed by the fiend fire in the book, as opposed to one of the basilisk fangs in the movie.
Right.
But does it really matter? No. It's an adaptation. It's I think it's fine up till then. Um, as far as um, the barrier goes, I don't think I have an opinion one way or another. I think the intent behind that choice was to show that, it's like it's really more like a siege. You've got hundreds, maybe thousands of dark wizards under Voldemort's control that are going to be coming in, and it's supposed to give weight to the situation. It's a way to illustrate just how overwhelming his forces are supposed to be. At least that's my interpretation of it. I would think that's why they made the decision to do it. But I don't think I have an opinion one way or the other. So up to that point, I wouldn't make any changes. I think pacing wise, they do a good job. You get and I guess the point is up to that point, that's not the important meat of the story. It's just these things need to happen because that's how you get from point A to point B. Just simple as that. It needed to happen and
Right.
they made it happen. And so I don't have any complaints. I wouldn't change anything. I probably wouldn't even care if they did it completely differently. It's just one of those things that it's inconsequential, I think.
Right.
So up till then, I'm not gonna
You're
complain.
all right. Well, let's move on then, Zach. Uh, and to kind of think through, they destroyed the diadem, and then for the rest of the movie, we have Nagini, we have the soul in Harry that we don't know is there yet, and we have the soul in Voldemort that we need to get rid of. And obviously Voldemort, that's the last piece that needs to be done. You from that point, it's like I feel like there was a retreat in the book, right? Where like Voldemort kind of says, you know, take care of your dead or whatever, give us Harry Potter, you've got an hour or whatever, and Harry
Hmm.
kind of sees all of this death and destruction, and that's why he decides to go and turn himself in and sacrifice himself. So we have that where he has to go and face Voldemort. Um, and then his, death, where Voldemort thinks he died and he's, gloating and, from now on you put your faith in me, like that scene or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and well done, Draco, like
Oh gosh. Cringe.
very cringe. And then Harry shows back up alive. He does his stuff, the actual battle between Harry and whoever and Voldemort and all of the rest of it, um and then that's it. Am I missing any of the broad strokes of what happens?
Well, you didn't mention probably the best part of the entire franchise, which is the tale of the prince.
The Tale of the Prince. Yes, yes, yes. All right. But let's jump back there. So that's where we're going. That's what we have left. Talk to me. What are your thoughts? This is really the climax of the film, and if we're being honest, this is where I would change things the most. But I want to hear your perspective.
Honestly, if I'm going through, I don't have much of a problem up until the final battle between Harry and Voldemort. And I'll tell you why. The Prince's Tale, I thought they did a really good job. It's another thing for me, sort of like the conversation with Aberforth, where yeah, if they could have shown every memory that Snape gave to Harry in the book, that would have been great. But pacing and time limits on movie run times, it's like they had to cut something out. Probably I would trade off the Aberforth payoff for more Tale of the Prince, I think. But regardless, I'm satisfied enough with what they did. Then you get to Harry sacrificing himself. You can nitpick and say, well, he in the book, he didn't tell anybody that he was going. He didn't tell Ron and Hermione. He didn't tell Ginny. He just mentions to Neville, "Hey, kill the snake," and that's it. And then he goes, right? But um, you get to the Forbidden Forest. He realizes he needs to open the snitch. He does. He sees his parents and Lupin and Sirius, and then he goes and you have the sacrifice plus Dumbledore's scene in King's Cross. I really don't have any problems with that.
Right.
Um, what it comes down to is Harry's final battle with Voldemort. In the film, they had um, Harry and Voldemort going all over the castle. They're on the staircase. They're up in the astronomy tower. You know, Voldemort takes the time to punch and kick him instead of using magic, which I don't think is quite in character with who Voldemort is.
Right.
You see him using the magical ropes from his robes to strangle him and hold him in place, and then they fly and merge together, and then they roll into the courtyard and they're all alone, right? It's not how it happens in the books, and although spectacle-wise, I think it's visually striking and it's more of an action sequence, but it misses the point of the final battle in the book. Harry comes and starts taunting Voldemort, right? Voldemort sees Molly Weasley kill Bellatrix and he screams in rage. And about then is when Harry takes off his invisibility cloak and um, reveals himself to Voldemort. And it wasn't until then that um, I guess that was when Harry revealed that he was still
Alive.
alive, right? That was the first time. So Voldemort's in shock right then, and Harry starts taunting him, right? Telling him, "Have you not noticed that none of these people have died since you killed me? You Only your Death Eaters have died. Everyone else on the inside has been safe. You still don't get it. The exact same reason why you couldn't kill me all those years ago is the reason why you can't kill any of them now. It's because of selfless, loving sacrifice for somebody else. It puts a magic upon these people that you can't comprehend, right? And that's the whole point. And and then he starts taunting him about the Elder Wand, right? And in the end, it's once again Voldemort's curse that rebounds and he kills himself, right?
Okay.
And it's not this ethereal evaporation into ash. He just
He just
falls
died.
dead to the floor. He just dies like anyone else.
Right.
And in the end, there's nothing unique about him. He's just a lost soul.
A
That's
lost
it.
soul. Yeah.
And and I think that's my biggest complaint is that you don't get that emotional tying the knot of this is why, and I think in my mind that was when the reason why Harry survived, why he was the boy who lived finally made sense. Maybe it's because I was too young to really click with any of the previous mentions of it throughout the books. But when I read the book, in seventh grade, that's when it finally clicked. It's like, oh well, that's why he survived. That's what this whole point is. Voldemort can't comprehend love, right?
Right.
And so I think that was the biggest missed opportunity of the entire series is not bringing it full circle and explaining that from from day one when Voldemort tried to kill Harry, it hasn't worked because of this kind of love.
I agree, but let me play devil's advocate for a minute.
Sure.
Um, how do you so like put yourself in David Yates, the director's position. He has this final battle. He needs to make the fight between, you know, Voldemort and Harry seem more epic.
Hmm.
Or, you know, it's like we've waited 8 movies for this final scene, and if we did everything that you just barely explained, that's what, 3 minutes, 5 minutes of content, and it's mostly talking. So like with that in mind, and it's the same thing. I feel like don't Harry and or Harry, Hermione and Ron kind of battle the snake Nagini for a little bit, and then when Nagini is about to like chomp down on him, that's when Neville shows up with the sword and he, cuts the head off. Where in the
Yes.
books, he just, you know, for some reason Voldemort thinks he should, you know, bring the sorting hat out and set it on fire on Neville's head, and
Hmm.
and it doesn't stick. And that's another thing. Sorry, let me before I continue on. Uh you don't see that in the movies after Harry's sacrifice, none of Voldemort's spells can hold.
Hmm.
He tries to silence everyone multiple times, and they break the spell fairly easily. No one dies, like he sets Neville on fire. That should have ruined his entire face and killed him, and it didn't. Like these things are happening, and his spells aren't holding, and you don't see any of that protection. And you didn't even know what that was until Harry explained it. But like you miss all of that. I would have added that in multiple different spots, and maybe they did a little bit, and I can't remember. But
I don't think they did, and that's sort of where I'm coming from,
right,
right? And so to answer your question, how do you make it more action-packed, right? I think we talked about this earlier in our 8 week montage, but have Harry and Voldemort actually duel. Like I by the end of the series, I have gotten so sick of seeing the green and red beams of light meet and just stay there. It's like that happened once. He's using the Elder Wand now, though, so that wouldn't even be possible. Same with, when we were talking about Order of the Phoenix, that whole thing wouldn't be possible because they didn't share the cores. That's the only reason why it worked in the
right,
first place, right? And so here's how I would do it. Number one, they already had a great score for that final scene. The music is so epic. Keep the music, but add in Harry's dialogue as they're dueling and have, Voldemort's frustration build and build as he throws these curses, tries to use the Cruciatus curse and Bombarda Maxima or whatever, some heavy spells to try and attack Harry, and Harry's able to deflect them and send them back, and use, bring in some transfiguration type stuff. The same way that they depicted the battle between Voldemort and Dumbledore. Start doing that sort of thing with Harry and Voldemort. But in the middle of it, have Harry explaining. You have Harry's voice explaining this and Voldemort just getting more and more frustrated. You can draw that out and round it all out with the music that they already had, and that would be more than sufficient. You get the emotional payoff both from Harry's explanation and the music. Music is so underrated in film, and you can see Voldemort's growing frustration and then ultimate demise. That would be how I would do it. And
You
I
know,
think, go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's all you.
Well, I was gonna say I like that because we've already discussed, and that as the director, or you have to take some liberties. Some things translate better and others and whatever, but like that like as long as we're taking a liberty and trying to extend Harry and Voldemort's duel, like goodness, let's do something amazing, I guess.
Hmm.
Like, and that's been my biggest complaint throughout uh the movies when it comes to dueling, is that it's just there's no nuance to anything, like,
Hmm.
and to a certain extent you can't really depict all that you can in a book in the movie, but like that scene between Voldemort and Dumbledore in Order of the Phoenix is like, we should have had more of that for the final
Hmm.
duels of each battle. Like, and I think we talked about it before, or maybe we didn't in one of the episodes. 8 weeks is a long time to remember everything that we talked about.
Right.
But we kind of had that, like, okay, why don't they just Avada Kedavra everything then? You know? And it
Right.
was like, well, it's kind of got to be exhausting. Not that you have mana or whatever, but like
There needs to be a reason why not.
there needs to be a reason why not. Otherwise it's like, well, let's just keep doing it,
Right.
If that's the only spell you really need, it's unblockable, only one person has ever survived, then there's no reason not to do it. But it has to kind of be like a last ditch effort to me,
Right.
because you can't necessarily just one after another Avada Kedavra everything. I don't know.
Hmm.
I wish
I
we had more discussion on that, and maybe we could talk about that in the books, um but the thing about magic is there are so many different things, and dueling is a chess match between you and your opponent. I'm gonna move here and block this, and I've got this spell, and I'm gonna try and outthink him. I'm gonna flank him here. He's doing this. I'm trying to counter that. And
right.
you don't get any of that with, you know, it's like we essentially reduced one of the coolest things in the series, uh, dueling, to a gunfight.
And that's basically what it is. And I was gonna bring up that point, but it's like, yeah, and I think the scene that comes to mind is in Deathly Hallows Part 1 when they're running through the forest from the Snatchers, and you've just got the beams of light, the beams of white light, little orbs of white light that are shooting back and forth, and it's like it's just a gunfight. There's nothing special about it. It's just a gunfight.
Right. And that's where and you have to pick and choose, and there's so much content, but it's like there are some questionable things throughout the books that we would have, or throughout the movies that we would have changed. That's something that I would have added in because it's cool. It's like,
Hmm.
especially where, ignore the other ones. Like you can't try and maybe, budgets, and it costs a lot of money to do certain things, and sometimes for sake of adaptation and making things the way that they should be, or not should be, you have to pick and choose. it costs money to do special effects.
Right.
That sucks. But at the end of the movie, at the climax of an 8 film series where they have made a ton of money and they can basically write a blank check and do whatever they want and they will make triple their money back at the box office, let alone in the future or whatever. They should have spent more time on this because they spent money doing all of these things, the special effects and the fighting and whatever between Harry and Voldemort that we talked about, the punching and the kicking and the moving from one place to the other and the green light and all of this stuff. And it's like you could have had an epic battle taking all of those resources and putting it into, you know, Voldemort is trying to prove his superiority as a wizard,
Hmm.
and he does this. Okay, well, Harry blocked it, and then he does something else. Harry blocked it. Like it feels like Harry is reduced to Expelliarmus way too much, and you forget that he's, you know, learned a lot of spells over the course of his 6 years, especially after, the Goblet of Fire, where he spends like an
Hmm.
entire month learning curses and spells and whatever. And then in, you know, book 5, um, Order of the Phoenix, he teaches all, kids older and younger than him how to, defend themselves. And he's got this broad knowledge base, and we don't even really acknowledge it. And it comes down to white lights and Expelliarmus. And it just kind of cheapens it, I think.
I couldn't agree more. And I think maybe in future episodes we can take elements of the series and just discuss them and talk about what we would do better.
Right.
But honestly, I think that about wraps it up for me for Deathly Hallows Part 2.
Now, there's only one other thing that I want to mention, and it is nitpicky, but this is something that bothered me, and we touched on it last week when we were talking about um, in the book. There's a scene between when they're at the Ministry where Mr. Weasley and Percy are on the elevator together and they're not talking, and and that's something that I feel was a missed emotional payoff because there's so much that goes into these movies and the books, and you can't have everything. But I wanted Percy to come back because you can see that that is an actual important thing that happens. He wasn't at the wedding. He is at odds with the Order of the Phoenix and his parents, and his ambition is getting in the way, and then he slowly realizes that he was wrong, and he comes back, and that's not easy to admit. I was wrong. I was blinded by my ambition, and it took me a while to admit that what I was seeing was not right, but I knew it wasn't, but I couldn't, my pride, my ambition, all this stuff, like it took me a while to admit I'm wrong and I'm sorry. And you miss that emotional payoff. And I think it's significant because Percy represents probably 90% of wizards out there.
Hmm.
We get into this idea that everyone is split into, members of the Order of the Phoenix and Death Eaters. Well, there is the vast majority of the population, the wizard population, that is just they're just normal people.
Right.
And uh they have their own biases and their own ideas, and yeah, they know certain things are happening, but like, they don't want to admit that the Ministry of Magic is wrong, and they're scared themselves, and they don't want to stand up, and they have their own things and desires that they want, and they're just as scared as everyone else, and it takes a while to admit, yeah, this is wrong. I need to come back. And then the Weasleys are like, "Welcome back, Percy. Let's go and kill some people," you know?
Right.
Like, and that was it. It was like, "Let's go," like, "You're forgiven." Of course you were forgiven. You were betrayed,
You were betrayed. Of course you're forgiven.
So anyway, I feel like that was a small thing. It would have been, 3 minutes in Deathly Hallows Part One and 3 minutes in Deathly Hallows Part Two, and it would have added so much for me, I think. But once again, nitpicky. You have to decide what's important, what you're going to bring in, what you're not. I don't know, but I would have brought Percy back because I feel like it is significant and we don't read into it or we don't give it as much credit as it is due. I think it's his character growth is just as important as anyone else's. So anyway, that's all, Zach. But I agree with you. I don't think I have anything else to say besides that.
I guess that'll do it then.
All
Let
right.
us know what you guys think, both of our comments and your own. What would you change? What did you like? And do you think this series deserves an HBO reboot like they're doing? Because I'm still not sold, and maybe we'll talk about it in a coming episode.
I am sure in the future we're going to end up talking about that. I am scared a little bit because and here's the problem with the reboot. Um I keep thinking, yeah, they did a real, not that I have seen Game of Thrones, but the idea of Game of Thrones did really well until that final season, I guess, because they had, a wealth of books to draw upon and all of this stuff, and everyone loved it. But like Game of Thrones wasn't a movie already, and
Exactly.
Game of Thrones, I don't know how many people. Maybe I don't. Yeah, maybe I don't know, but it wasn't as big of a deal as Harry Potter was, right?
Right.
Harry Potter was so big. It was such a huge deal when the books were coming out and the movies. And for, 15 years, probably it was the center of everything. And then
Right.
um, Game of Thrones wasn't quite like that. So maybe expectations weren't as high. But now it's like, okay, we have everyone thinking what they want and imagining Harry Potter in their own way. And how are we gonna, how are you gonna live up to the expectations of what it should or could be? Short of you go chapter by chapter and make sure that everything, every little bit is in there. I don't know.
I don't
I'm
know,
not
man.
sold.
I wonder if it's a mistake. We'll have to see.
We will see. But anyway, we could talk about this forever. We're gonna end it there. If you have anything you want us to cover in the future, now that we're done with the Harry Potter movies, uh, let us know. What do you want us to fix? What do you want us to go over? We're open to suggestions. We have plenty of ideas, by the way. So we're gonna do whatever we want anyway, but let us know what we should do. And then we'll be back next week with another episode. And we appreciate all of you who have been listening.
We'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.